Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to A3 Math. So today, we're going to look into solving quadratic equations. What we know so far about quadratic equations? Well, we spent the last few weeks factoring. Quadratic equations, and more importantly, using the cross method. What we will learn today is what it means to solve a quadratic equation. And furthermore, given the solution, we will then learn how to derive the equation from the solution. So let's get into it. What does it mean to solve a quadratic equation? Well, the general form of our quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, right? This is just a general form of our quadratic equation. So what it means to solve, it means to find the roots or find the solution that equates our quadratic to 0, that makes this entire equation true. So we're looking for x values. I'll give you a hint, there's always two x values that make our equation equal to 0. Now there's three ways that we can go about solving a quadratic. The first being graphing. The second, factoring. And the third, using something called the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula. Now on a test, I don't mind which of the three you use, unless I specifically ask, use the factoring method, use a graph, or use the quadratic formula. If I don't ask, if I just ask you to solve a quadratic, I don't mind which of the three methods you use. So the first method is graphing. So if we had a quadratic that looks something like this, if we had a quadratic, again, and it's asking to solve our quadratic. Again, to solve it, it means to find the x values that make our quadratic equal to 0. So if we had a graph, all we have to do is simply read off our x values that make our equation equal to 0. So in this case, x equals -2, and x also equals +2. That's it. There's our solved solution for our quadratic shown in red. If we had a different quadratic, let's say something like this, nothing changes. We simply read off our x values that make our equation equal to 0. So in the case of our blue graph, x equals to -6, and x also equals -3. Not too bad, right? It's pretty simple. We just read off our graph. Our second method is factoring. Now we spent a good portion of the last few weeks learning how to factor quadratics. So if we had something like x squared minus 3x plus 2 is equal to 0, we know how to factor this using the cross method. If we don't remember how to factor using the cross method, go ahead and check my previous videos out so we don't get lost here. Anyways, if we were to go ahead and use the cross method, we would get x minus 1 and x minus 2 as our factors. Don't believe me? Go ahead and try the cross method of factoring. So what does this mean? Well, these are our factors, but what x values would make this equation equal to 0? Well, in our first case, if x was equal to 1, x equal to 1, so 1 minus 1, well, this equals to 0. And doesn't matter on this side because 0 times any number is 0. So x equal to 1 is one of our solutions. And what about here? Well, if x equals to 2, this equals to 0. 0 multiplied by anything is always 0. So our solutions for this is simply x equals 1 and x equals 2. So all we do with factoring, the factoring method, is we factor our quadratic, and then we find the roots. We find out what x value equates each factor to 0. And that's our solution. The third method is the quadratic formula. Now the quadratic formula, if you haven't seen it before, is x equals to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Now what does this mean? This might look a bit daunting of a formula, but if we remember, our general form of a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. And if we had, let's use our exact same quadratic that we used before. So x squared minus 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. If we had a quadratic like this, all we have to do is read off the values for b, for a, and for c, and plug them into our quadratic formula. So let's go ahead and do so. So x equals negative b. In this case, b is negative 3, so negative b is simply 3. Now we're going to plus or minus the square root of b squared, so b is negative 3 again, so negative 3 squared, minus 4 times a is 1, right? A is 1. So times 1 and times c. Well, c is positive 2. C is positive 2. And this is all divided by 2 times 1, right? 2 times a, and a is 1. So now we just go ahead and solve. So we have x equals to 3 plus or minus the square root of 9, negative 3 squared is 9, minus 4 times 1 times 2, minus 8. All divided by 2. Now we simply have x is equal to 3 plus or minus 1 divided by 2, right? So 9 minus 8 is 1, square root of 1 is still 1. So the fact that we have plus or minus means we're going to have two situations. The first being plus, so 3 plus 1 divided by 2. And the second being subtraction, being minus. 3 minus 1 divided by 2. This would give us our two solutions. So at first, 3 plus 1 divided by 2 is simply 2. And over here, 3 minus 1 divided by 2 is simply 1. Meaning our two solutions are x equals to 2 and x equals to 1. Now if we remember, if we go back, these are the same solutions we got via the factoring method. So like I said, it doesn't matter which method you use unless I ask specifically for a certain method. So our final answer, x plus 2 and x equals to 2 and x equals to 1. Now, what if we go in reverse? What if we want to find the equation, but this time we're given the roots? So let's say we were given something. Let's say we were given something like x equals to negative 2 and x equals to positive 3. And we want to go ahead and find our quadratic equation. How do we go about doing this? Well, we know when we have the roots, we can simply write out the factors, right? So in this case, it's x plus 2 and x minus 3, right? These are simply the factors. So if we plug in negative 2, we get 0. We plug in positive 3, we get 0. This makes sense. And now, why not just FOIL out our factors? So we get x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 6 equals 0. Collect like terms, x squared minus x minus 6 is equal to 0. So it doesn't make it any more difficult if we're given our solutions first and we have to go ahead and find our equation. It's actually pretty simple. We just write out our factors, we go ahead and FOIL, and we collect like terms. That's it. So now you know how to solve quadratic equations and you know how to find quadratic equations given the solution.